We're recording.
Banter. Hey, I went to an escape room last night.
I saw that on your post. Although I was confused at first because the time said like 2 minutes. And I thought, wow, she escaped in 2 minutes. Well done.
No. We had 2 minutes to spare. So there was a lot of running about frantically and yelling at each other to, no, get that! Go!
Is that the one in at the city?
Yeah, we went to Fox in a Box and it was very enjoyable. We did the what was it? It was Nikola Tesla, so it was like Tesla's Mystery or something like that. And everyone I was with was like, "Oh, Elon Musk." I'm like, "No, not that one."
No,
still insane, just in a very different way.
Yes, very true. I was particularly proud of the fact that the reason why we were wasting so much time towards the end was we were getting very stuck on a particular clue that we couldn't work out how to solve. And it turns out it's because I had already partially solved it about 20 minutes earlier. And I don't want to give it away, but it was like you had to get something to put inside something, but I had already done the thing where you put something inside but with something else. I can see the face you're making, Julian. Stop that.
You can't set me up like that.
I'm sorry. We're not doing fan fiction this week. Stop that. Oh, dear. But no, it was a lot of fun. And I thoroughly recommend doing an escape room if no one has done that yet. It was number 4 on my list of 40 before 40. So that's another one ticked off. So I'm very excited about that.
How many is that now?
That's like 10.
10 out of, you're a quarter of the way through it.
Yes, I've still got quite a lot to go.
You're going to have to just take some time off work and really dedicate like a month to just getting everything done.
I'm not going to be able to take any time off work before my birthday. There's a lot of stuff to be done next year, unfortunately, but I'm not going to get into that. We should get into the episode. Welcome, everyone, to We're Not Helpful, a podcast about books and our recommendations, our opinions and thoughts on books. And joining me today, as always, is Brayton and Julian. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Oh, yeah, I should introduce myself too. I'm Eloise.
Hi, Eloise.
Who are you again?
What do you do here?
We've just met.
Where am I?
Who are you?
Why are you?
Oh, dear. Well,
Where's Buttercup?
Where's Buttercup? Yes. Before we get into this week's topic, how about we talk about what we have been reading this week? Who wants to go first?
I shall go first.
Excellent.
I'm still reading the same book, Phantoms.
Lovely.
It's a long book, but it's a good one. And now the whole town is missing, and now the army has shown up because they're convinced it's some kind of bacteriological infection that is
aliens.
Chemically engineered and what have you. But they are sadly missed. It's not aliens. It's not aliens this time. But I won't give away the ending. I'm also reading a lot of Calvin and Hobbes because somehow I managed to subscribe to a Calvin and Hobbes fan page on Facebook. So I've been reading a lot of that lately as well.
Does that count if it's just
valid
posted onto Facebook?
Well, Calvin and Hobbes was only a strip. It was never a long story. So yes, I'm going to count it.
Fair enough.
It's a very cute, funny comic strip.
I never
was
got
always
into it.
Oddly engaging and hard hitting at times.
It can't. Yes,
I
was more partial to Garfield growing up.
See,
Garfield.
I never got into Calvin and Hobbes because back when I was reading comics in, if you remember, Factor X in like the Sunday newspaper, Calvin and Hobbes was always the really long strip that I just didn't have the motivation to read through. But now, as a mid-30s person looking back, they're actually really good. And I really should read more.
The only comic I didn't like in Factor X was the Family Circus. I wanted to punch that little kid square in the face.
That one sounds familiar, but I don't remember what that one's about.
It was that little one circle of, like, it was just one frame, and it always sucked, and that kid was such a little punk.
It's
Family
like
Circus, my ass. It was just him being a dick for a whole frame.
It's like the same format as The Far Side, but just not funny.
Oh.
Yeah, I agree about Family Circus. It felt much more like a slice of life kind of thing with bad humor.
I'm trying to think what comics I used to read in like those X Factor ones. There was like Garfield, and I think I remember reading The Phantom for some bizarre
The Phantom
reason.
was there for a while.
Yeah, I think the Phantom is still going.
Foot Flats.
I never got into Foot Flats. I don't know why. It just bugs me. Oh no, I've gotten Julian offside early.
Oh dear. I quit the podcast.
Oh, that's what you quit the podcast over?
That's my line in the sand, apparently.
Oh, well, at least we know. Oh, no, that's interesting. Brayton,
Yes.
what have you been reading this week?
I've actually, this fortnight since our last recording, I've actually gotten through 2 books since last recording. I know. Well, one of them is Matthew Riley's newest offering, Mr. Einstein's Secretary.
Ah, now that one's kind of
yes,
based on a true story, isn't it?
Well,
or is
it's based on a true story by the fact that Einstein existed.
Yeah, okay.
And
well, I'm sold. It's basically a biography.
It is essentially. No, it's essentially about, and it's a different offering from Matthew Riley. If you don't know who Matthew Riley is, he usually writes a lot of thriller action thing. Like, he describes his books as action movies in print.
They're very bombastic.
They are, and they are not.
Well, there's a big word.
We like to elevate our vocabulary on this show.
We read enough. We should be using proper words. Be yes. Good speaking words. Speak good.
So anyway, his books are not quote unquote high literature.
No.
You know what I mean? He's never going to win a Pulitzer Prize, and he pretty much admits that himself. He knows the type of books he writes, and he just leans into them. He's not ashamed about it at all.
There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you need a bit of ridiculous fluff with, like, where you don't have to think about anything.
I have heard
explosions on the page. Ooh, explosions.
That's exactly it. I have heard his books described as a palate cleanser. You could read War and Peace, and then you need something fast and mindless. You get a Matthew Riley book, and you read through it in a day. And I
think I'm going to have to do that after I finish Moby Dick.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts about that. But
I don't have many more at this stage. They're at sea now.
Yes,
they're
finally.
Yes. They got on the boat and they're at sea. That's all I have to report on, I'm afraid.
Excellent. Well, I'll keep talking if that's all you've got for Moby Dick.
Yes, please do.
So anyway, Mr. Einstein's Secretary is a very different book for Matthew Riley. It's still very much his style, as in it's a very quick read. Like, I got through this thing in probably 3 or 4 days, and that's just reading at nighttime before I go to bed. And it's not an action book. It's much more of a drama, I would say, drama/thriller in certain parts. But it's essentially about this woman who is German, and she's raised in Germany during the time when the Nazi Party are just kind of coming to power and things are starting to get a bit more, I don't know how to describe, volatile, I guess is the word you would use. But it turns out she grew up next to Albert Einstein when he lived in Berlin. And it essentially goes through her life of her escaping Germany as the Nazis take over. She goes to secretarial school in the US and becomes secretary to all these people, including at one point Albert Einstein. And it also leads her to becoming a spy for the US during World War II.
Well, like spies.
So I won't say too much more to get in, so we don't get into too many spoilers. It is a really easy read. So if you're looking for something that is quick and easy, definitely check it out. My critiques of it would be that Matthew Riley, he tried to do like this epic life story of this woman from her early days right up until essentially the end of World War II. But because he's kind of went across this broad scope of decades, there's so many moments that I really wish he'd taken the time to expand on a lot more. Especially
he's a very very quick, like, scene to scene kind of writer.
Yes, and there's so many moments, especially I think the most interesting stuff for me was when she is this spy in Germany and getting all these insights into like the early days of when the concentration camps were being set up and actually visiting these concentration camps and seeing how they develop, and just having to stand by and watch these atrocities happen and take notes on what her bosses are saying about it and how they can like increase efficiency with the furnaces at Auschwitz. And
that's almost a story in itself.
Exactly. It's like, I wish the whole book was just about that section.
Yeah.
Because for me, that was the more interesting thing, but it just gets glossed over, this whole thing. And I just wish there was more. I wish this was one of those books that was like 1,000 pages long and he just took the time to explore these kind of things, which is very rare for me to say, because I will very hesitantly pick up 1,000-page book.
It sounds like Matthew Riley is probably not the author to delve into those kinds of topics, though. You'll probably find those kinds of books written by other authors.
No, and the thing is, I enjoyed the book. Like, if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't have rushed through it so fast. And I've been a fan of his work since I was like 15 years old. So literally half my life, I've been reading his books.
That's excellent. I know I've read the one that involves the theme park with dragons. And someone literally says, have you not watched Jurassic Park? And then everything goes to shit.
Yep, The Great Zoo of China.
That's the one. That's a good book.
That's a fun one. I really enjoyed that one. And it is definitely a Jurassic Park ripoff. And I think he knew what he was doing.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Julian, have you read any Matthew Riley?
No, I have not. My mother-in-law keeps trying to get me to read Matthew Riley, so I'm staunchly holding out against doing it, simply for that reason. I don't like being told I need to read a specific author. It turns me off wanting to actually do that.
Yeah.
No, that's fair enough.
Yeah. So yeah, it's different for him, but I knew what I was getting into when I started it. So it didn't disappoint because I knew what I was getting into.
Fair enough.
But getting to the end, it's just, God, I wish there was more of this part, or I wish he had explored these kind of themes a bit more. But
that's a great.
Yeah.
I was about to say it's a great recommendation. And if any of our listeners have any recommendations for Brayton on like more in-depth stuff about Auschwitz and World War II, maybe send them our way.
Yeah, but I was just going to say, I've actually met Matthew Riley twice. Really lovely guy. Yeah, really lovely guy.
Just name dropping now, are we?
Oh, yeah, because if I name drop him and then send him an email and go like, hey, I just mentioned you on our last episode. You want to come on?
He needs our help. He needs our help in publicizing his books. I don't know how else he's going to get them out there.
I don't know. He also has a movie on Netflix called Interceptor, which he wrote and directed.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What's that about?
Essentially, there's
apparently nothing good if you read the reviews.
Oh,
look,
isn't that the review of every Netflix movie?
Look, I'm going to preface. Yes. I watched it. I'm going to preface it by the fact that if you go into the movie knowing it's a Matthew Riley movie, you're not going to be disappointed because it's exactly the same as his books.
Well, what's the problem then?
Actually, I will say that is accurate of every Netflix filming thing except maybe something by Mike Flanagan.
Yes.
He seems to get good reviews by everyone.
Yeah.
I always find people confusing when like you go into those types of films and it's like, well, what were you expecting? It's like you go to John Wick and then someone says, oh, there wasn't much of a storyline. I'm like, I'm sorry. What were you expecting other than it's crazy fights with knife fights and
it's like the people who are upset by snakes on a plane.
Yep. That movie delivered on its promise.
Did you want Shakespeare here? Were you expecting Hamlet retold?
I definitely wanted snakes on a plane, and that's what we got.
Yep. I walked out of that.
Samuel L. Jackson fighting snakes on a plane.
Yep. I walked out of that movie going, you know what? There was a plane and there were snakes on it. It delivered what I wanted. And I will
satisfied.
To this day, I will defend that movie. I love that movie.
It's so good.
It's so good, but it's so bad. I love it so much.
I love how it was one of those films where they said, they opened it up to the internet and said, give us suggestions for lines to film for this film. And that's how we got Samuel L. Jackson's iconic line of mother effing snakes on this mother effing plane. And kudos to those producers.
Yes.
That was amazing.
That is.
Oh, dear.
I got to rewatch that movie now. I have a second book that I read too. This one is this one is a shorter one. It's called Hollow House by Greg Chapman. Got it here because I knew I would not remember the author. Julian, you might actually be interested in this one because this is a horror book.
Well, now I won't read it.
Yeah, I know, because I recommended it to you.
So belligerent.
This is one I picked up. This is one I picked up at Supernova about a month ago. I met the author. He's an independent author that was selling a few of his books. This is the one I picked up. It was nominated for the Bram Stoker Award.
Ooh.
Oh, that's quite an illustrious award.
Is it? Because I had not heard of it since.
In the horror circles.
Yep. So, yeah, I don't think it won, but it was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award. Essentially, it's about this house on a street, the Hollow House. Mm-hmm. And essentially the house...
actually hollow?
Well, it depends how you define hollow. There's some metaphorical language, I think, involved there. But essentially, it's an
Maybe
evil...
the house was the friends we made along the way.
Maybe. But essentially, the house is evil through various...
Excellent.
For various reasons that become apparent throughout the book. But it starts to actually affect the neighborhood, and misfortune and everything befalls the people that live around the house. And it sort of examines how this evil kind of seeps into their lives and things like that.
So it's kind of like the Amityville house met up with the 1408 hotel room, and they had a little baby.
Kind of. And it's actually fun because it's a short book. It's only 167 pages. So I got through it in less than a week. And funnily enough, I've got the same critique as I do with Mr. Einstein's Secretary, in that I wish it was like another 100 pages longer. Because it's so short, it doesn't have that time to really examine the characters and some of the motivations, and especially the history behind the house. Because that whole stuff about the history of the house was really kind of, in my opinion, glossed over a lot. And I wish it had examined it in more detail. And I wish we'd had time.
Type of horror things where it's like it gives it over to you to sort of make up that story for your own imagination. Yeah, and that's where the horror can come from, because it's of the unknown.
Yeah, there's definitely things alluded to in it, and there is a lot that you just have to kind of fill in some gaps. And I think it was definitely an intentional choice by the author to not just spell it out for us. And I'm not really asking them to spell it out for us, but by the time it got to the end of the book, the characters just didn't really sit with me. Like, I didn't care as much about them as I had wished. And to the point, like, there were so many characters in here that just a chapter would start and it would say, like, oh yeah, Daryl was doing this. I had to think, okay, wait, who was Daryl? What's Daryl's connection to this? And there were a few times and a few little subplots with some characters that I felt weren't as fleshed out as they could have been. But yeah, I just wish it was longer. I actually really enjoyed it. I did like the book, despite what I'm saying. I just wish it had more.
So it begs the question, I think. Is it better for a book to maybe not include as much and leave you wishing it had included more, or to overstay its welcome, as some books often do, by going into too much detail?
I don't think you're ever going to have an answer to that, because it depends on the reader. Because I certainly am one of those people who do like things spelled out for me a little bit. Like, I like closure, and I like things sort of being wrapped up in a neat little package. But at the same time, like, a little bit of mystery is fine. But I do find things very, very frustrating when they don't have a resolution, or if something hasn't really been explained as well as it could have been. I find a lot of H.P. Lovecraft stories like that, because half of them always end with horrors unimaginable. So, well, if they're unimaginable, how am I supposed to imagine them then?
Yeah, H.P. Lovecraft is a good example, but I think H.P. Lovecraft went out of his way to make it unexplainable, because he's literally writing about stuff human minds cannot comprehend.
Yeah, he had a lot of ambiguous stories. The stories where he did actually kind of explain things were my favorite ones, which actually had like a complete story, where sometimes, yes, certain threads were left unspoken, but you still sort of got some kind of cohesive structure to what was actually going on. And I am actually going to mention one of them when we get into our topic in a moment. So I'll hold that back, that little tidbit back for now.
Yep.
Speaking of, Julian, did you want to take the lead on this, considering it is your idea for this week?
Sure. So obviously in my other life, I am an English teacher. And as an English teacher, we often give our students books that they need to read to complete their assessment. And every now and then you come across a book that really surprises you in various ways, ones that you think the kids will really, really enjoy, but they actually wind up hating. And then there's that other little nugget of gold in the books that you're not sure how they're going to go anywhere. You think the kids might really not like them, and then they wind up absolutely loving them. And I recently taught a unit, and I'll use that as my example a bit later. I recently taught a unit where I really wasn't sure how the book would go. And it surprised everyone in how good it turned out to be and how enjoyable it was for most of the class, and myself included. And Brayton, you said something the other week about how these days you really only pick books that you think you'll enjoy.
Yeah.
And so it got me thinking, what are those books out there that you've picked up to read? Maybe you were forced to read something at school and you thought it would be terrible, but you actually wound up really enjoying it. Or vice versa, a book that you thought, yes, finally this book is out. I can't wait to read it. It's getting great reviews, and you read it and you're just like, oh, well, that really wasn't all I thought it was going to be. So I thought that might be an interesting thing for us to discuss. We've all come across those books, I think, that have surprised us in some way, where we just left a bit flat with it, or it turned out to be a lot better than we thought. Usually the ones we had to read in school, I think.
Because I had.
So who'd like to talk?
Yeah, because when you mentioned that topic about, especially about linking it back to school, I always have flashbacks to year 11 English, where there was a book called Maestro that we had to read, and I didn't read it. I read one chapter of it and found it so boring I never picked up the book again.
That must have made the assignments a bit difficult.
Luckily, we didn't have any assignments on that book.
Fair enough.
Why did you have to read it?
I can't remember. This was 20 years ago now. But I guess if we want to jump into my two examples for this that you made me think back at school is one was The Crucible, which I know is a play, but at the time I wasn't as into, I guess, theatre and stuff as I am nowadays. But The Crucible I absolutely loved and still consider it like my favourite play. And it's still my dream to play Hale in a production of that play if that opportunity ever arose. Anyone out there that works in theatre and is looking for a Hale, I would absolutely.
Hey, we have our own theatre company. Admittedly, we haven't done anything in about 10 years. Julian, get on that.
15 years, actually.
Oh my God, has it been that long? No, that's not how time
2008.
No,
oh my goodness.
I'm not that old.
Yeah, so I absolutely love The Crucible. Still love it. I think it's awesome, an amazing play. But my second
absolutely is amazing.
It is, yeah. My second one is a bit on the nose of classic literature, but it is To Kill a Mockingbird. I went into that thinking I wouldn't enjoy it because I think it was might have been year 10 or year 12, one of those 2 years. And
usually year 10.
Yeah. Look, again, this was 20 years ago. I can't be expected to remember everything about high school.
I've tried to forget personally.
Yeah, that's fair.
You still work in schools.
My high school years.
Oh, right.
Now I'm the bully. It's okay.
Wait.
So yeah, I remember being about halfway through To Kill a Mockingbird because unfortunately we did have assignments on that book, so I did have to read it. And yeah, I got about halfway through and went, oh, I'm actually really enjoying this. This is actually good. And no wonder Harper Lee coasted on most of her life just publishing one book, because it's a damn fine book, in my opinion, anyway.
So what made you think you wouldn't enjoy it going in?
Because, and no offense to English teachers, but they have a way of making even the most exciting books sound very boring when you're going into it. I will say not every
because we
English
must
teacher...
understand what every word means. What is the deeper meaning of the word to?
Yes.
Oh, let me talk to you about The Great Gatsby then.
Oh, let's not get into that argument.
No. Brayton, you keep going on.
Yeah, I think it was just the way my English teacher sort of described, oh, this is about essentially the civil rights or the early civil rights movement. Or it was more of, When was civil rights? That was the 60s, wasn't it?
That was the 60s, yeah.
Yeah. So this is like, we're talking about it in context of this was like set in the precursor to the civil rights movement, and it's about this person, and there's these complex characters, and we're going to really learn about what society was like for people between like the African Americans and the white people and the culture clashes back then and blah, blah. And it just sounded like, oh, okay. I wasn't excited to read it. Let's just put it that way. Especially knowing we had assignments coming up for it. And I think, Julian, you mentioned in last week's show or last fortnight's show that you don't believe you should be forced to read anything because you feel it's a great work of literature. Whereas in school, you're kind of expected to read this because it is considered a great work of literature. So I wasn't excited
and I would stand
to read
by that statement.
Yeah. So let's say I wasn't excited to read it, but it turned out that my assumptions for that book were wrong, and it is actually a very good book.
I think the brilliance of that book is how it approaches everything, because it approaches the whole situation from Scout's naivety. She doesn't know what's going on. And so we're learning as she's learning, and we're experiencing all of this in real time. I think it's not a lesson that's being hammered home to us like a lot of those books can be, particularly the ones that look back on that time. Whereas Scout is experiencing all this in real time and struggling to understand what's happening in real time.
Yeah.
And so I think the audience kind of goes through that with her.
Was Harper Lee writing at the time this was happening, or was it set in the past from her? I can't remember when she wrote To Kill a Mockingbird.
No, she wrote this, I want to say in the 50s she wrote this. I think it was set in the 30s.
Okay, so she was looking back.
Yeah, so she is Scout, essentially.
Yeah, so it was first published in 1960, and the book is set in 1936. So yes, you're right. Yeah, couldn't remember.
And of course, the little bit of trivia that Dill, her friend and neighbor, was based on Truman Capote.
Yes, because they were very good friends, weren't they?
Yeah, extremely close.
And yeah, for a long time.
Wasn't there rumors that he assisted her in writing the book or something?
There are rumors that he ghost wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, yeah.
I remember reading it in high school as well, because obviously it was just part of the curriculum, so like everyone read it. I'm assuming people still read it now as part of the high school curriculum. And I don't remember finding it interesting, which is a horrible thing to say because it clearly is a very interesting and thought-provoking book. And I think the problem is that sometimes when you're a teenager and you're not interested in certain things like activism, it's just something that doesn't come into your sphere of care. And I think that has a lot to do with it when particular books are put on the curriculum for people to learn. It is possibly a way to get them to care about those certain things. But I think the problem with teenagers is that they're always going to be railing against authority, railing against school, because that's just like the typical thing for them to do. So it's almost like they're going to not care or like the book on purpose. And I think I found that a lot with the set curriculum. And it was also probably because I was well into fantasy novels at the time, and obviously there's no fantasy novels in the set curriculum, so it's like, well, I don't want to read this because I'm too busy reading Dragons of Pern and Lord of the Rings.
Well, we read The Hobbit in Year 8 English.
Oh, you're lucky.
Yeah, which I did.
Narnia is also often read in schools.
Yeah,
really? No, it was.
And The Ranger's Apprentice.
Julian. I don't remember Narnia being.
It's The Ranger's
read.
Apprentice in school curriculums.
Well, it's only year 12 that has a very set curriculum of books that you can't step outside. Outside of year 12, the school can essentially choose the novels as long as they fit in with what content and what descriptors need to be taught. You can study really any book, whatever the school chooses.
I think I would probably maybe like to reread To Kill a Mockingbird now, just from like obviously an adult point of view, and having seen and heard a lot of things now since then that might be very relevant to what's going on in To Kill a Mockingbird. I see how I feel about it now.
The thing about To Kill a Mockingbird, and yes, I am an English teacher, but English teachers mess this book up so horribly because They focus so much on the civil rights and the blacks versus whites in it, not understanding that that is only a small part of the book. The book isn't just about Tom Robinson's trial. The film was really just about Tom Robinson's trial, but the book isn't. The book is about that. But it's also about this girl trying to grow up in a world that is trying to keep her down. It's also about home lives. It's about a struggle for money and society. It's a struggle. It's about domestic violence and domestic abuse. It's about rape. It's about murder. It's about hate and anger and all those emotions that everyone feels at some point or another in their life. And so English teachers insisting that it's about this and we're going to focus on this, well, you're actually cutting off, in most schools in Queensland, you're cutting off 90% of your class from really understanding anything. Because I've taught in classes that were almost purely white. I've taught in classes that were mixed race. I've taught in classes where it's mostly girls or mostly boys. And everyone can get something out of it if you approach it from the right direction, because it's not just about Tom Robinson's trial. Although I will say, the one part that angers everyone is when Tom Robinson is shot trying to escape from prison in the back 14 times.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
that gets a lot of people very angry when they hear that.
Yep.
Because doesn't Scout get attacked in the book?
She does towards the end, yeah.
I think I remember that more vividly than anything else I remember from the book. And that doesn't happen in the film at all, does it?
It does. It happens in the film.
It does? Oh, okay.
Yep.
It's
Robert Duvall in his very first film appearance who saves her.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm going to have to I've been thinking about rereading it because I haven't read it since I was in high school. And I wonder how I would feel about it now as an adult looking back on it. And I think that's to tie into it, because I know my feelings towards To Kill a Mockingbird was definitely opposed to some of my classmates who were like you said, Eloise, weren't really connecting to it in the same way. And I think that brings up the question of one, it's that are we picking, or are the people that decide the curriculum picking books that just aren't relevant to kids now? And at the same time, To Kill a Mockingbird is set in a very specific time and place, and a 15, 16, 17-year-old teenager in Australia who hasn't had that experience maybe isn't as relevant or wouldn't have that connection, whereas someone living in America that has some kind of background knowledge about that may feel something different about it.
It is. I think the thing is that civil rights in America is a very forefront issue, because obviously there is a lot of history tying a lot of people to that sort of thing. We have the same thing here in Australia. I think the only difference is that ours is still very invisible and repressed, thanks to certain systems that repress them, and where we as straight white people walk around not really thinking about that kind of thing, because it hasn't really been something that was visible to us, especially in our formative years. Like when you think about Indigenous culture and teachings and the history of everything that happens since white settlement, I certainly did not learn about 90% of the things that went on at high school or in primary school, because it just simply wasn't taught. I don't know if it's any different now. I think that we are sort of moving towards a little bit more historical teachings within schoolings, and I think for reconciliation we should be doing that more often. But most of the stuff that I have learned about, what has happened in Australia over the last 200 odd years has come from being an adult, Googling it and hearing the voices of First Nation people telling their stories, rather than anything I've learned in school. So I think something like To Kill a Mockingbird is important because it does provide the context for those kinds of issues, where it could then leap into learning more about our own parallels here in Australia. And I suppose what I'd like to see is more books that are like that from an Australian perspective going into school curriculum as well, because like Brayton says, it is kind of hard to relate to it when it is very US centric. I don't know if you guys agree.
There are a number of books, Australian books in particular, that do have those issues in them. The problem is, because they're Australian, they're very realistic in the sense, like, Indigenous people do it tough quite a lot of the time. There's a lot of drug and alcohol abuse in those communities, and there's a lot of violence and a lot of suicides and things like that. And a lot of the Australian books that really portray those kinds of things are very well written, but unfortunately schooling and its curriculum is still quite conservative, and they don't want those sorts of themes in schools too much. So, we don't get those kinds of things as much as perhaps we would like.
Well, maybe, I don't know if we can do like show notes or something, Julian, if you've got any recommendations for those types of books that you can pop in, we can pop into the show notes for people to look at later, and perhaps, go and have a look at a later time, because obviously it's not going to happen with the schools anytime soon. Sounds of it.
There is, I don't know any books, but there was an Australian movie made a few years ago called The Nightingale, which I think was on Netflix last year. I don't know if it's still there, but
I recall that one.
It deals, it's set in Tasmania and deals with the effects of the settlement there on the Aboriginal population. And it is very confronting. It is not a movie for kids or even, I'd say, teenagers. But if you're interested in something that deals with those themes, look up The Nightingale. It is a brilliant movie. I loved it, but it is very full on. So be warned.
Just getting back to the books that we have read in high school,
Yes.
Would you recommend perhaps all of the ones that we did have to reread again as adults and see how we feel?
Don't read Z for Zachariah again.
What was that one?
That book, is about a nuclear war that happens, and there's only one person left alive, this 17 or 16-year-old girl, because her valley is for some reason cut off from the nuclear exposure. And then a man appears weeks later or something like that and teaches her how to farm and what have you, and helps her to raise crops and all the rest. And then it goes on from there, and it becomes quite unnerving as he grows more creepy towards her. And what could have been she escapes, but what could have been a rather good novel and explored some really interesting ideas is really kind of ruined by the fact that it's the 60-year-old white man trying to write as if he was a 17-year-old girl, and clearly has no clue what 17-year-old girls are actually like or what they think.
That's why I have a problem with the Tomorrow When the War Began series.
I haven't seen the series. The book itself I read and really enjoyed.
I have not read
after
those
the
books.
first 50 pages. Only the first one. I've only read the first one.
Of the Tomorrow When the War Began. They get a little bit ridiculous by like book 3. The spoilers, they've escaped to New Zealand, and then like the New Zealand army are like, "Hey, 16-year-olds who just escaped from Australia, come back with us because we totally need your expertise to fight these invaders." I'm like, that's dumb. That wouldn't happen. So anyway, yes, I still wouldn't read The Great Gatsby again.
I got into an argument with another English teacher about that book because I hate it. I hate the story. I hate the characters. And for me to enjoy a book, I need to feel some kind of empathy towards the character's journey. But every single person in that book, with the exception of, I think it's Tom's wife. No, he was married to Daisy. It was Daisy's friend's husband, maybe the only one I feel sorry for in that entire novel. Everyone else is just a piece of shit. Which, like, that was F. Scott's point, and I get that. He wrote that specifically to show us the hollowness of the quest for wealth and socialite status and stuff in Middle America. But geez, come on, give us something to enjoy. I mean, by the end, everyone basically dies or is a broken shell, and you're like, oh, good, go. Glad this thing is over.
Good, I'm glad you're all dead.
Yes, I was. Oh no, Gatsby's dead. What a shame. Oh no, Daisy's a broken shell of a woman whose husband finally got fed up and left. And oh no, He's dead too, I think, now. Good.
5 stars. Highly recommend.
5 stars.
My English teacher friend disagreed entirely, and we got into quite the argument over that.
I love how it was Julian who ranted, even though I was the one who brought it up, hating it.
Well, I
have issues with that book because everyone goes on about how brilliant it is, and good, Leo's in a version of it, and he'll do it justice. What justice? It doesn't need justice.
It's because read it. It was one of those books where it was like symbolism. So much symbolism in it. There's like the sign with the glasses, and it's supposed to be the eyes of God. And then my English teacher like made us write some kind of analysis thing on it for our assessment. I was like, I don't know, why are we doing this?
Go and read Of Mice and Men by Steinbeck instead. It's a much better story.
Well,
excellent.
I have not read The Great Gatsby or seen the movie, but I have seen the Family Guy adaptation. So I feel like that pretty much covers it.
Yeah,
they probably did a better job.
Oh my goodness. Right. Shall I talk about my books that I've got?
Yes, on that note, please, let's move on before I have an aneurysm.
All right, so I've got 3 books actually that I will speak about that surprised me. So the first one is rather cliched, but it is The Hobbit. It was one of those books where, and I think I spoke about it briefly last week, or last podcast.
Look, The Hobbit was on my potential list for this podcast, but I didn't include it because I was fairly certain I would enjoy The Hobbit before going into it, and I did.
Yes.
So it didn't surprise or disappoint me.
Well, like I had mentioned previously, I hadn't really been that into fantasy novels prior to my dad recommending that I read it. And it just, like, it's one of those things where people say don't judge a book by its cover. But I did, because it had a dragon on it. And it looked interesting. I'm like, oh, dragons. I like dragons. I've been reading Dragons of Pern. Okay, I'll read this one. And I remember, as I said last time, thinking how it was just such a jolly little book that just drew you into the story straight away. And like, I didn't have the expectation going in that I would really enjoy it. And then it became straight away my favorite book, like after I read it. It's like immediately. So Hobbit's number 1 on the list there.
Yep.
The second book, as I teased a little bit before, was a H.P. Lovecraft story. So it is The Color Out of Space.
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, yes. So, and if people haven't really read much of H.P. Lovecraft, and surprisingly, I was speaking to someone the other day who was like, oh, who's H.P. Lovecraft? I'm like, what are you talking about? You don't know who H.P. Lovecraft is. He's the father of horror.
But
and
I will
ranted at them for about 5 minutes.
I will have to stop because I think we are legally obligated to say that H.P. Lovecraft was a horrible racist and we do not condone any of his views right now.
Yes.
I think we have to preface that first before we go into H.P. Lovecraft, because his writing is amazing and it has impacted, I think, every single horror writer since then.
Look, when you think about it, all artists are terrible. Don't admire any of them because...
Admire their
Keanu Reeves.
Oh, except who?
Except Keanu Reeves.
Oh, except Keanu Reeves. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, but that's out of the way. Yeah, The Color Out of Space is a brilliant story. I think it's one of his best.
Amazing. This is one of the ones that does not end with horrors unimaginable. It has imaginable horrors because he describes them in great detail. It was and I had actually bought one of like the gigantic books that like had about 15 stories of H.P. Lovecraft in it. So I had already read a whole bunch of his stories in a row and was starting to get a bit bored because some of them do get a bit samey and the endings are very similar, horrors unimaginable. And then I got to Color Out of Space and it was just this very slow, burning, intense horror about something funny happening on a farm. So essentially the storyline is that a meteorite hits meteorite. What is it when it actually hits the ground? Is it meteorite when it hits the ground or meteor when it hits the ground?
I believe the technical term is space rock.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm focusing on the wrong thing.
It was about a space rock.
Space rock.
Yeah.
Exactly right. It's a space rock that slams into the ground and it's glowing purple, I think, or something. It's glowing something. So, of course, let's just
glowing an indescribable color. I think.
Yes.
It is
an indescribable color. So let's just go in there and take it. That's not a problem at all.
Which I think, a bit of trivia is the movie version did use a shade of purple that I think the shade doesn't actually exist, at least in nature on Earth, which is why they picked that specific shade of color, because it doesn't appear naturally on Earth.
Is this the Nicolas Cage film?
Yes.
I haven't watched it yet, and
of course it's a Nicolas Cage film.
I know, I'm loath to, because it's like Nicolas Cage, it could go either way of it being bonkers or being good, and it's my favorite story. And I don't know if the movie's going to do it justice.
Look,
it is bonkers.
Either way, you're in for a ride.
Oh yeah, I will say I've seen the movie. It is absolutely bonkers, but in the best way possible.
Okay. Good
I think I really, really liked it. There is a lot of body horror and stuff like that, like reminiscent of The Thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
If you can deal with that, then I think you'd really enjoy the Nicolas Cage film. I don't
remember the book describing it like The Thing.
They do. The movie does adapt some things in different ways.
Okay. So with the book itself, it was one of those books where I was surprised just how scared I was reading it, because I don't usually get like terrified or anxious about things that I'm reading. But it really put the creeps in me, something chronic. It was just the way things were described. And I don't want to give it away. Like, there are just some really amazingly scary moments within this story that I don't want to really describe, because I just want to recommend people go and read the book if you feel like having a bit of a good scare. So that's one of the ones that really got to me in terms of, I didn't think I would like it because I'd already been a bit H.P. Lovecraft out by that point. And it piqued my interest again. So yes, there's that one, and Herbert. Oh, what's it? Is it Herbert
West Reanimator? Herbert West
Reanimator. Yes, that one's also, because that's a horror, but it's funny. So
I
recommend that one.
If we're on a H.P. Lovecraft tangent for a second, I really recommend the music of Eric Zahn. Which
I know I've read that one, because I've read them all now, actually.
Yeah, so
they all blend into each other.
They really do. Music of Eric Zahn is a beautiful story that is actually not. I would not class it as a horror, which is unusual for Lovecraft. It's just a story about something strange that has happened to someone, and it's not
in the neighborhood.
Yes.
Who are you going to call?
Probably the Ghostbusters.
He-Man.
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 Oh, yeah. Good reference.
Oh, my goodness. Music of Eric Zahn, where something strange happens, but no one dies and nothing horrible happens and no one goes insane. It's just a really weird story, but I think it was actually one of Lovecraft's favorite ones too. And of course, you can't go. You've got to read Out the Mountains of Madness and the Call of Cthulhu, the classics.
Obviously,
both great.
What's the one with the ape princess?
Ah,
I know the one, but I can't remember. Let me look. Give us your third
George
one.
of the Jungle.
Yep. Talk about your third book. I'll look up what that one was.
So the third one that I wanted to talk about as well, and actually I'm going to bring it up on my phone so I remember who the author is The Book Thief, and that is by Marcus Zuzak. The Book Thief is one of those ones that was recommended to me, I think, by my aunt, who lent me her copy of the book. And she described it as about a family living in Germany during World War II, and it's a young girl who's been orphaned, so she's come to live with a couple, and then they house a Jewish artist, so they hide him in their basement. And I thought it was going to be kind of like, Anne Franke kind of book. But what really surprised me about this one is the way that the book itself was structured. And it's kind of hard to describe, but it was just a very unique and beautiful and sort of playful way of structuring where each of the chapters kind of sets up, how do you describe it? Sets up like the themes and the like the beats that's going to happen in the chapter, and then it unfolds from there. It's sorry, I'm not doing a very good way of describing it, and you do not get that in the film at all. Like The Book Thief, I think, was probably unfilmable because what makes the book unique couldn't be on film, or it could, but they didn't attempt it at all. It just was a straight story for the film, and I didn't enjoy it as much watching it, and they cut out a whole bunch of really important stuff anyway. So yeah, it was just this lovely story about this young girl sort of helping her adoptive parents hide this Jewish man, and how that sort of unfolds during, the occupation of the war and the threat of everything that was happening during World War II, but also finding moments of like happiness and beauty in this basement, because they paint all of these beautiful things on the wall and tell stories of what's actually on the walls, and but it's also about her, like, at school and just being a normal girl at the same time while keeping the secret. And oh, that's right, I almost forgot the most important part. The story is being told from the perspective of a personification of death, essentially. So it's kind of like death. That's what was unique about it. It was death was like putting in all of the bits of what was going to happen in the chapter and then explaining it, essentially. And yeah, you don't get that in the film. Like, that's not happening in the film at all. And that's what's disappointing about the film version. So it was a very quirky book, and it sort of gave a bit of light to a very dark topic. So there you go, Brayton. Actually, coming back to the whole, you want to know about stuff in World War II, read The Book Thief if you haven't read The Book Thief. Yes.
I've seen that book in stores so many times. I've been tempted to read it, but I don't know, never got around to it.
I'm going to double check. I think Marcus Cusack is Australian, actually.
I've had students recommend it to me from time to time.
Yeah, he is. He's an Australian writer. There you go.
So someone recommended it to you, so you'll never read it.
I'll never read it.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
That H.P. Lovecraft story was Facts Concerning the Late Arthur German and His Family.
That's the one. That silly, stupid, creepy, weird book.
Yep, that's the one.
Wow.
Julian, did you actually give any options? What am I saying? Any books yourself for this topic? Kind of talked about.
Not yet. I haven't.
Brayton and I talked.
Oh, really?
Like, what are your recommendations, or what did you find surprising, or something?
I would love your perspective I would love your perspective, like, as a teacher going and thinking like, oh, this is going to be awful, and then a book you actually enjoyed teaching. Have you got anything like that?
That's what I'm about to talk about.
Perfect.
I do, actually.
It's almost like we pre-planned this, which we didn't.
No.
Can you tell?
Fun fact, of course, H.P. Lovecraft was a huge influence on Stephen King. As you mentioned, most horror writers. And Stephen King writes a brilliant little short story called Crouch End, which is very Lovecraftian in its way.
Yes.
In fact, I think he actually uses Lovecraftian creatures in the story. So if you have an opportunity, it's quite short.
Does he use horrors unimaginable as the ending?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, I mean, the fact
it's one of the few endings he sticks, actually.
Oh, good.
Oh.
And I mean, the fact we have the term Lovecraftian just kind of shows what kind of influence he has had on fiction writing.
Absolutely. So I'm going to choose one from each end of the perspective, one that surprised me and I enjoyed, and one that surprised me and I disliked. I'll go with the one that I enjoyed first, and Brayton, that is the book from a teaching perspective. I wanted to change things up a bit because I had to teach a book a couple of years ago called Fly Away, Peter, and it was one of the most boring books you will ever have the displeasure of reading. It's an Australian novel about a bloke who worked on some property down near Bow Desert, categorizing
local
birds for the person who owned the property, and then decided I should join up for World War One. And so he did. And it was really boring. And just to highlight in how boring it was, he actually spends 1 or 2 paragraphs describing his friends' hats, which has no bearing on the story, nor do his friends' friends.
Wait. Let's hear about this hat.
Anyway,
No.
it was the hat of someone who has a lot of money.
Keep going.
It was awful. And so I decided we're not going to teach that again. The only thing that has come close to boring me like that before is Michael Gow's Away, which I had to teach. And I read the first page with my class and said, nope, we are not learning this play. Let's go find another one.
God, that was.
But the book I want to talk about is Fahrenheit 451. By Ray Bradbury. And so Ray Bradbury, of course, was very influential in the American science fiction writing world in the 60s and 70s, right up until his death about 15 years ago. He was very, very popular, and again has inspired a lot of authors, both in science fiction and various other means. But Fahrenheit 451 was probably the first novel which really pivoted him into success in the US. But it's 60 years old. So it was written in 1963 or published in 1963. So it's 60 years old. And a lot of sci-fi from the 50s and 60s, you kind of look back on now and you're like, oh, it's not really all that interesting. It either never came to pass and never will come to pass, or it happened back in the 70s and 80s. And it's kind of like old hat to us now. But the story of Fahrenheit 451, of course, is a dystopian near future. So I think it was 2030, I think, was the year it was set, or thereabouts. And it's a very normal, almost, society in that the way everything's described doesn't seem too unusual to how we live now. People go to work, they come home, they have dinner, they live their lives. Except books are illegal. You cannot own books. They've been outlawed by the government because books allow independent thought. And creativity and imagination. And the government doesn't like that. And so if you are caught reading books, these firemen come out to your house and burn the books. And of course, Fahrenheit 451 is theoretically the temperature at which paper ignites. And so that's why he titled it Fahrenheit 451. So the book centers around Montag, who is a fireman. And at first he enjoys his life. He doesn't see anything wrong with it. But then 2 things happen. One, he meets a neighbor, a 16-year-old girl named Clarice, who her family doesn't watch TV, doesn't do anything like that. And they spend their time sitting on the porch talking to each other and discussing ideas. And she asks him a question. She says to him, "Are you happy?" And he can't answer that because he doesn't know if he's happy or not. And that question continues to weigh on him and weigh on him. And then he gets called to start a fire. He gets called to this woman's house to burn her books. And the firemen are trying to get the woman out of the house before they burn her books because she has to be arrested and what have you. And she says no. In fact, she decides she's going to burn with her books, and she sets the house on fire and burns to death with them. And that leads Montag down this idea of what is so special about books that she is willing to die for them. And so before the fire consumes the place, she actually steals the book and takes it home and begins reading it. And then the story really begins to move along from there. And I won't go into too much spoiler or anything like that, but the novel is interesting in a number of different ways. In one, that it's heading into an area of banning independent thought or outlawing independent thought. And I feel that touches on a lot of things these days where creativity tends to be frowned upon in a lot of ways, particularly independent thought and that sort of thing, and investigating and researching and, listening to the people who have laid the groundwork for years before us and building on what they all have already done, to take things further. And this idea that we're in charge and we know better than you. And I found that really, obviously, quite an important thing going on at the moment. but also the way he describes the house. Like, this is written in 1963, but the house has wall-to-wall television. So the screen has multiple screens on the walls, and you can watch whatever you want, whenever you want, all programmed, of course, by the government. But it also has video calling where you can stay in contact with your friends via video chats. These little things called seashells, which are like little earbuds that you put in your ears like headphones. I thought, wow, that's... He literally is describing... he's describing basically your average earbuds that we have today. And things like that as well, which I found was just really interesting. And I thought, we'll go into this story and it probably won't be all that interesting, but it really captures you. And if you've never read Ray Bradbury's work, he has this amazing way of just making you feel really unsettled when he's writing about the most mundane of things. And if you ever get a chance to read A Sound of Thunder, it's very beautifully written, but also very unnerving in its way. It's where we get the whole idea of the butterfly effect from. So that was a Ray Bradbury creation. Yeah. And it's also what that Simpsons episode where Homer goes back in time is based on. When he squishes the bug.
What are donuts? Tell me.
Yes. But there's no donut rain in A Sound of Thunder, but it is a really interesting, very unsettling kind of story.
Just turn me off it.
Just turn you off.
1 star.
But it's very apparent in Fahrenheit 451 when Montag, the main character, comes home after his first shift, right at the start of the novel, and he's kind of describing the house that he lives in, and there's nothing out of the ordinary. It's kitchen, lounge room, television, wife, bedrooms, stuff like that. But you never feel like it's a comfortable place. You never feel like it's safe. You never feel like it's real. And Bradbury was so good at keeping you on the edge of your seat throughout the novel. There's just always this unsettling feeling of alienation that he managed to put into his writing. And so I wasn't really expecting to enjoy it. I have to read this. It's for work. It's 60 years old. The kids are probably going to hate it. But in the end, it actually really surprised me how much I really did enjoy it and how much the students actually really enjoyed it. And the discussions we got out of it were phenomenal because, yes, English teachers do tend to look at books and try and read more into there than there really is. But Bradbury wrote this book specifically for that purpose. It is a book of symbolism and allegory and things like that as well. But just really, really well written, not like The Great Gatsby. And so that's a book that I really actually enjoyed that I thought I wouldn't. A book that I really didn't enjoy that I thought I would is The Tommyknockers by Stephen King.
Oh, bad-mouthing a Stephen King book.
So this book is a you love it or you hate it, I think, from what I understand. And when I was about 16, I think I'd read half a dozen Stephen King books already. And they had a mini-series on the Tommyknockers with Jimmy Smits in it. And, of course, I was absolutely smitten by Jimmy Smits at the time because he was in NYPD Blue and he was, the brilliant but, slightly unhinged detective. It was cool. And so I watched the mini-series and it was poorly done, of course. It was a network TV, horrible effects, all the actual adult stuff cut out because it was network television in the 90s.
Yeah,
very terrible.
Back before the golden age of television.
But it had a number of intriguing moments and a couple of genuinely creepy moments. It also had Tracy Childs in there, who was a porn star of some fame at the time. So of course I was 16. That really did engage me. She was having an affair with the mailman in the story, so that was interesting too. Anyway, I thought I'll read the book. Because, miniseries are usually crap, but the books tend to be much better, like The Langoliers. No, the miniseries was great right up until the fuzzy cannonball. But the story itself...
you can't blame that on the effects of the time, though. I think if you did The Langoliers now, it would be very good.
Yeah, maybe. I just feel like that's a really hard effect to pull off and not have people laugh at it.
I suppose.
Which is why...
like 5 times. I don't know why.
Which is why Stanley Kubrick actually cut out the hedge animals in The Shining. But yes, the Tommyknockers, I read the book, and again, not one single character in that book is likable. Not even the main character. The character played by Jimmy Smits in the TV series. In the book, he's an insufferable drunk who finds any and every reason to upset people and get into fights. His girlfriend is just an uncaring, unsympathetic person who just doesn't really care about anyone or anything around her. The townspeople are all horrible, and when they slowly begin to get possessed by the alien life forms, they become even more horrible. And so the novel itself, while people think maybe it was King writing about his own addictions and how it takes people over so insidiously and almost silently until you become a complete shell of a person, it's more like a drug-fueled nightmare than an actual book. And it's just, by the end, you're just kind of happy that the town was destroyed and everyone's dead, I think.
Another one.
There's just nothing redeemable about anyone in that story. And the storyline itself kind of vagues in and out of coherent writing. It was the last book that he wrote before he got clean. And he himself has said there's a good story in there somewhere, but we'll never find out what that story is, because he doesn't have a lot of memory of actually writing the books. So. But look, some Stephen King fans love it. They know what it is, and they just enjoy it for the complete drug-fueled ride that it is. But it's a story that I thought, based on the premise that I saw in the miniseries, would actually be an intriguing read, and it was the exact opposite.
Damn.
Yeah.
So not on your list of recommended Stephen King.
No,
reads.
I did try rereading it 10 or 15 years later just to see if a bit of adult perspective had changed my mind, and no, it hadn't. If anything, I found them worse people than the first time around.
I just had to look up the Tommyknockers just to get some background info on it while you were talking, and yeah, literally like one of the first lines in the Tommyknockers Wikipedia page just says King has since soured on the Tommyknockers, describing it as an awful book.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and there's that quote exactly. There's a really good book in here underneath all this sort of spurious energy that cocaine provides, and I ought to go back. So it feels like
if the author can say this is a trash novel, then there shouldn't be any problem with us saying it's a trash novel.
Yeah. I wonder how that feels for fans that enjoy the book and then look at it and realize that the author hates it.
It hasn't changed people's minds on the Shining movie.
True. It's hard when that movie is regarded as a classic of cinema, of horror cinema at least.
Look, it's a brilliantly made film. Like it's brilliant. It's unsettling. It's creepy. It's visceral. Stanley Kubrick was a master filmmaker. It is just the worst adaptation of a Stephen King novel that I've ever seen.
You could say the same thing about the Hobbit trilogy.
Oh.
You could.
Hey. It may be an unpopular opinion, but I will watch those movies and I enjoy them. They are a terrible adaptation.
Oh yeah. They're fine on their own if you don't take into account what the actual book is.
And I do not blame Peter Jackson or any of those people making that movie.
No, it's not his fault at all. Like,
if you watch the behind the scenes footage, they had no time to prepare for this shoot. They were straight into it. And there are literal days where they shot nothing because they had no script and no ideas about what to shoot. Compared to Lord of the Rings,
very stressed.
And comparing it to Lord of the Rings, where they were in pre-production for like 5 years before they shot any footage, you can tell why The Hobbit was as, unfortunately, CG filled as it was, because they just had no time to do anything.
I find the weirdest CG part is making Billy Connolly's character. Who did he play? Dane, I think.
Dane Ironfoot.
Dane Ironfoot. He was in costume. They made him up, and then for whatever reason, I don't know, his entire character became CGI, and it is the weirdest thing because you can tell it's CGI. It's not like it was good CGI because it was rushed. It was not the type of quality CGI that Weta is usually known for. And I don't know why they did it. It was the weirdest thing. But I tell you what, the good thing about that film, it's got Orlando Bloom and Orlando Bloom 2.0 in it. Luke Evans.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm not complaining.
Look, you get double the Orlando.
Yes. Double the Orlando.
I do find it funny how, I don't know if this is actually true or not, but they tried to shoehorn Aragorn into the story. And Vigo said, no, I'm not going to appear in that. Aragorn's not in the stories.
He was
and Orlando Bloom was like,
canonically at the time, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was like canonically only 10 years old at that time.
Oh, was he? He
was 50 years before?
Yeah, because don't forget it's 50 years before.
He would have been in his
20s.
He was 87
he's like
in Lord of the Rings.
In Lord of the Rings.
And if it was 50 years before Lord of the Rings, he'd have been, 30 something?
Yeah, well, I think he was a little bit younger than that because it was still...
I don't know.
I can't remember
now how long before it was.
I feel bad considering I'm supposed to be this complete repository of knowledge of Tolkien.
This is what Google was invented for. You were originally correct. Aragorn was around 10 years old when The Hobbit took place.
Ha!
There you go.
And apparently
that wouldn't have stopped them from doing it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. And apparently one of the
choice.
original pitches for the Rings of Power TV show was Aragorn prequel series of his days as a ranger.
That's
I mean,
not a story
who knows?
If it's not Vigo, it's not worth it.
No,
that might still be on the table considering which production company has got the rights to do a whole bunch of new prequel Lord of the Ring stories.
I'm not sure.
Oh, I should look
Probably
into that.
New Line.
It's not Amazon. It's a different company again.
Because Amazon only have the rights to the appendices. They actually don't have the rights to the Silmarillion.
Yeah, it's so dumb.
I know.
I don't know how it works. Let's not get into a rant about Rings of Power because this will go for another hour. And on that note, I think maybe we'll wrap up for today. Good. Thank you very much, guys. If you would like to follow us on social media, we do have a Facebook page. Go to We're Not Helpful Podcast. Give us a like and subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and on YouTube. Again, do all the likes and the clicks and the subscribes and send us in some reviews. That would be really helpful.
We got some good feedback for your fanfic from last episode.
Yes. Thank you, Greg, for letting me know that apparently it was way more erotic than what I tried to lead on to say that it was.
And if you want to try and tell us that The Great Gatsby is a good novel, I will go to war with you.
Oh my God.
Yes, fight Julian in the comments.
If you want to be a guest on this show to debate Julian about The Great Gatsby, please do.
If you want to email us, what's our email address, Brayton?
It is nothelpfulpod@gmail.com.
Excellent. And I have now set up a messenger app link on the Facebook page as well. I'm still trying to work out how to get on Instagram. Maybe I'll start a Tumblr as well because Tumblr's great.
Ooh, why not?
And if you do have any recommendations that you'd like us to talk about, please do let us know and we'll take them into consideration, when we get time. Of course, we're huge now. We're 4 episodes in and have at least 10 listeners. So.
Yeah, our dozen listeners. There are dozens of us.
Dozen of us.
Hey, we have an official complaint from a listener. We've made it official.
Oh, yes. I never read that, but yes, we did get a complaint about Julian's use of the word nips in episode 2.
I shall use it more often.
Yeah, that was the complaint. It wasn't used enough. Thank you. Right. Thank you for that feedback, Richie. You know who you are.
All right. Well, until next time, keep reading all those novels, I suppose.
Yeah.
You're not my boss.
Or don't. We're not your parents.
Yeah.
We're not helpful.
You're not the boss of me.
Or just come to us for all your book recommendations.
Excellent.
Read The Great
Until next
Gatsby.
Don't read the Great
Fight me.
Bye-bye, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.